So I'd like to talk a little bit about values. Values are an incredibly important component of both individual and organizational lives. They're huge, they're directly related to success and failure, and there's something about which people rarely reflect in a careful way. Values are just an incredibly important part of everyday life, both at the individual and at the organizational level. In the immortal words of that great Oklahoma citizen, Will Rogers, it's not what you don't know that'll hurt you, it's what you do know that isn't true. Values are what it is you know that isn't true and what are going to hurt you. So it's really important for development to understand, be clear about your values. Consider the fact that culture is incredibly stable across generations. 90% of the population will vote exactly the way their parents voted. They'll raise their children exactly the way their parents raised their children. They'll eat the same food, they have the same recipes, they'll even live in the same neighborhood. How do you account for that incredible continuity of culture across generations? And the answer is values. Values are the DNA of culture. You took on your parents' values, you'll perpetuate your parents' values onto your kids, and culture will stay the same. As another example of how values can influence your life unconsciously and negatively, consider a book called Hillbilly Elegy by a fellow named J.D. Vance. He's the product of white Southern poverty, and he argues that the values that white Southerners hold are exactly what handicaps them and keeps them committed to a life of crime and poverty. And he makes the case quite eloquently. Another example of the power and pernicious consequences of values, consider the fact that people like other people who share their values, and they can't stand people who don't share their values. Values are what drive prejudice. Values, for example, the clash of values is the cause of all the problems in the Middle East. Moving then to the organizational level, because people like being around people who share their values, people are attracted to organizations where the culture is the same as their values. What you get then in organizations over time is progressive homogenization, is the people who like the values of the culture stay, and the people who can't stand the values of the culture leave. And this is a very well documented process. Organizations become more homogeneous over time. The culture of an organization is defined by the values of the people at the top. And as Peter Drucker, the great savant of American organizational life, famously said, values eat strategy for lunch every day. That is to say, you may have the world's most effective business strategy, but if you have bad values in the organization, you're doomed. You're not going anywhere. So then that raises the question, what are the values that characterize effective organizations? There's a substantial business built around organizational surveys. They're usually in the context of engagement surveys, but they're all about values. And these surveys are all descriptive. They come in and they survey your organization, and they tell you what kind of values your organization holds. It seems to me that misses the point. What if the organization holds bad values? More importantly, the survey, it seems to me, should ask, here are your values, but here's what your values should be. Here's where you are, that's where you need to be. So that's called values. It's a distinction between values as a descriptive enterprise and values as a prescriptive enterprise. We're going to start focusing on prescriptive values. So why not identify the values that characterize high-functioning organizations? People evolved as group-living animals. These groups have always been in competition. Some groups prevail, some groups lose. My argument is that high-performing groups will all have pretty much the same values. One way to approach the study of values, properly it seems to me, and empirically, is to study the values that characterize high-performing organizations. So my bet is that organizations such as the New Zealand All Blacks, the best athletic team maybe in the history of sports, the New England Patriots, the best professional athletic team in America, the United States Marine Corps, which is a very, very well-run organization, German Mittelstand businesses, which are the best, economically most successful businesses in the world. I promise you that they all share pretty much the same values. The question is determining what those values are.